A lot of people do attempt to suck out the venom, but that's not realistic at all. A lot of people do attempt to put ice on it. They will try to cut their arm open. Some people have peed on the snake bites. There are several people that have actually hooked themselves up to their car and tried to electrocute themselves. People think that anti-venom kills more people, and so it's not safe to actually treat with.
But just say you had like a cut in your mouth. Are you kind of panicked?
I mean, at that point, I would start worrying. If you had an open, actively bleeding wound, I would be nervous. People don't take being spit on seriously like they take being bit.
I think venomous snakes are simultaneously the most fascinating and terrifying creatures on the earth. Now, I am a reptile person, so I think they're incredible, but I know there's so many people out there who are not interested in reptiles that are absolutely terrified or petrified of these animals. Now, if you think about it, it is bizarre to understand the fact that there are animals out there that can inject a little bit of their essentially modified saliva into your body and end your life. And because of that, there are so many myths and misunderstandings about how that works. What happens when you take a snake bite? What happens if you're in North America and you get bit by a native species, or if you're a private keeper and you get bit by something more exotic, or maybe you live in Africa or Australia? There are so many different facets to this conversation, and because of that, it creates a world of insane myths. Many of them are not true, and just people that are just misguided and not understanding what to do. Today I'm speaking with Zoe and Jackson, who are a young couple out of Texas. They are the founders of the Anti-Venom Support Group as well as the Fauna Learning Center. We start the conversation discussing what happens when you take a bite from a venomous snake when you're totally unprepared. Maybe you're hiking through the woods, you take a bite, or maybe you get bit by an animal in a private collection. What are the events that unfold, and what do you need to do to make sure you save your life? Then we jump into the science of anti-venom. What is anti-venom? How does it function? How does it work? How is it made? How much does it cost? How do you get a permit in order to have anti-venom to support your collection to make sure that you're doing the right, responsible thing? We discuss many myths that surround the venom community, whether it's electrocuting yourself to get rid of the snake venom or sucking venom out, which you've maybe heard many times. When to use a tourniquet, when not to use a tourniquet. We also discuss the many myths that surround anti-venom itself. Can you use it when it's expired? Does it become more dangerous if it's expired? Is it actually more dangerous to use anti-venom than just take a snake bite, which to me was a very strange myth. We discussed that as well. If you are somebody who is interested in venom, whether you're just a person that likes to go on hikes or you're someone that actually wants to keep venomous snakes one day in the future, you absolutely need to listen to this episode. This is Animals at Home. My name is Dylan Perrin. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the episode. This podcast is all about improving your reptile husbandry. However, I know not everybody has the time or the money to go out and spend thousands of dollars doing custom builds. Thankfully, friend of the podcast, Josh Halter, aka the Bio Dude, is working hard to make better care more accessible. He makes turnkey bioactive kits for leopard geckos, ball pythons, tortoises, invertebrates, dart frogs, and the list continues to grow. He has spent years testing and perfecting these handcrafted substrates and dietary supplements to create the most effective products. If you visit thebiodude.com, you will see he is a proud supporter of both USARK and responsible reptile keeping, and there is an option to donate to either at checkout. Zoe and Jackson, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for doing this.
We're happy to be here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think this is a topic that is fascinating to everybody. Even if you're not a reptile person, venom and snake bite is something that I think is almost mythical in some sense. I was thinking about it today. If venomous snakes weren't a thing within nature, it would be one of those. It would be there would be a huge literature of mythology around that concept of something as simple as two pinpricks in your hand could cause serious damage or death. I think that's it's a fascinating thing. So like I said, even if you aren't a reptile person, this is a topic that most people are interested in some capacity if they're not just totally afraid of it in general. I kind of wanted to start the podcast with more of a scenario so we can paint the picture for later on. I'm just, maybe for the listeners, can we paint the scenario of what happens when someone gets bit by a snake when they're totally unprepared? So whether it's maybe it's an exotic species that's not native to North America, or a native species, maybe they're going for a hike or something. If there's differences between those two, you guys could let us know. But what kind of unfolds once a snake bite has taken place? If either of you can jump in on that.
Do you want us to go over if it would be a native bite, like something that occurred outside? Or
yeah, maybe let's start with the native bite, and then if then we can kind of branch off to something maybe more exotic. Somebody has it in their collection or something from a non-native species.
Sure. So for a native bite, the good news is we don't have to get a picture of the snake in the U.S. when I say native, because the treatment's going to be the same. and they know what to use based on the symptoms. So any North American pit viper bite gets either crofab or antivit, and that's it. So the most important thing is just getting to the hospital. There's a lot of things of what not to do, right? You know, don't ice, don't suck, don't put on a tourniquet, don't electrocute it, don't do any of that. And then if it is a coral snake, again, you don't need a picture. They can tell by the symptoms. And then sometimes they do give the coral snake antivenom.
And
depending on the bite.
A lot of people do like attempt to suck out the venom, but that's not realistic at all. I mean, your blood flow is already going; it's already pumping through your veins. A lot of people do attempt to put ice on it. They will try to cut their arm open. Some people have peed on the snake bites. Some people have gotten other people to pee on the snake bites. There are several people that have actually hooked themselves up to their car and tried to electrocute themselves. Some people don't believe in going to the doctor, and they'll actually go to a religious organization to attempt to receive it. Even in the United States, they'll do that. And typically what ends up happening is eventually when they start getting really sick and it starts getting really bad and their tissue is deteriorating, that's when they go to the hospital, and they've caused irreversible long-term damage at that point.
The good news is with the hospitals here, we have anywhere from 1 to 5 deaths a year from snake bites.
I think it's 3.4 exactly, right?
Yeah, average 3.4. So not many at all.
Which is actually amazing, considering how afraid people are. I mean, I fortunately, or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, I live in a place where there is no venomous snakes, really. I mean, there are some in Canada, but none where I live. And so I never have to worry about, shoving my hands into a pile of leaves or something. But even still, with the fact that there are fairly potent species in the United States, it's actually a really rare occurrence to die.
It is.
But it's listening to talk about all these different myths that surround what to do when you get bit. That just shows you how I think how fascinating and scary being bit by a snake is, that it just generates all these bizarre things. Like, where does the electrocuting thing come from? Is that just like, what the hell's that?
I have no idea, but if you follow National Snakebite Support, which we work with a lot of the doctors on there, like Dr. Green, Dr. Brandehoff, and then we'll discuss with Kimberly Watt and what are some of the other doctors? Jason Folt, all that. They will post and talk about scenarios they've encountered, leaving people's names out. And the electrocution thing has come up several times. I don't know what caused it, but apparently more than one person believes this is a thing.
It was kind of eye-opening a couple weeks ago where we were talking about like snakebite kits and like, what to grab and stuff. And we were talking about Australian elapids and getting a tourniquet for that, which we can go talk about that later. But everyone from Australia was chiming in, being like, "Oh yeah, they sell these snakebite kits. They're awesome." And we looked at it and like it was accurate and had what to do.
It was a real snakebite kit. We don't have those in North America.
Yeah, in America we sell the little snakebite suck extraction kit that's been proven to be useless, and still it's in every box store.
That's hilarious. And I mean, in some ways, intuitively, if I were to get bit by a snake, I would feel like I would want to suck it out as well. But yet, like you said, it doesn't make a difference. Anything that you do suck out or extract with your mouth is probably a tiny percentage of the damage is done. So for folks who are listening, if you get bit by a snake and you're totally unprepared, just get to the hospital. Simple as that. You have time.
Local hospitals too to see who stocks antivenom. Most of them are going to, but if you live in a really rural area, that might be worth. There used to be an app that you could check. I don't know if that's available anymore. No. But you can just call and ask, and then you can have that in the back of your mind. There's also a lovely book sold by National Snakebite Support that's like a little notepad with, I think, maybe 10 pages that goes over the North American snake bites of what you should do, and you can bring it to the hospital with you. You also do not need to bring the snake. I think we talked about that a second ago, but a lot of people do try to bring the venomous snake into the hospital, which of course causes more problems.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, and I guess we will talk about kind of how anti-venom is made and whatnot, but just for simple terms, because most, besides the coral snake, like I said, and the lapid bite, the other viper bites, they're all can be essentially treated the exact same. So you don't need to identify the species of snake because you're going to be administered the same type of anti-venom.
Right.
And then as far as the amount of anti-venom that someone gets delivered, and we will talk about this more later too, but I'm just curious right now, is the quantity of anti-venom required just based off of the amount of venom that's administered in the bite, or that you're actually bit with? It's
a case-by-case basis, and it's based on the symptoms. And like you keep giving doses of antivenom, whatever the dosage may be for that antivenom, until the symptoms get under control.
Okay,
So
that makes
until
sense.
you have controlled symptoms, it's not still swelling, it's not still necrotizing, you still give antivenom. And I should say this, we're not doctors. I want to preface that with.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So, and then let's maybe just quickly discuss somebody getting bit in maybe an exotic setting or a private setting in a captive exotic animal that they've imported, or you bought a captive bred venomous species from Africa or Australia or however it is. I'm sure somebody could come up with an example of how that might happen. What's the scenario there? Because this does actually happen where people will get bit in a private collection with in an unprepared scenario, which seems like such a bizarre thing to happen, but it does happen. So what would unfold in that scenario?
So a lot of times, it kind of depends on how serious the bite is, but like I'll just give an example of a situation that I know that happened semi-locally. There was an individual who works with pretty next-level species like black mambas per se, and he was fairly well trained, had been around these animals for years, knew what they were capable of, probably had like a bite protocol, which for the longest time that was the standard of being prepared, and now it's kind of clear that that's not enough, like even remotely. But at the time this happened, that was considered prepared. So this is not a jab at him by any means. It's just to show that, we've evolved this level of preparation much more. He went into respiratory distress within a few minutes and became unconscious within like 10 minutes. So thankfully he was able to get someone to drive him to the emergency room or call an ambulance in that time. And they, of course, had to scramble to figure out what did bite him. Was the animal contained in the room? Could emergency services enter the room safely without, also being at risk of getting hurt? They had to stabilize him at the hospital. You had to bring in family to make medical decisions as well.
He was on a vent.
He was on a ventilator. And then they had to scour all over the state, if not outside of the state, to get the proper antivenom. Thankfully, what he needed was something that most zoos do stock, but you do have to find a zoo that's capable of giving it to you and willing to give it to you. They typically don't turn people away, but it creates a really unhealthy relationship with the private sector and zoological facilities, because then their people are then at risk. And because of that extended period of time between treatment and actually the bite, the symptoms were much worse. The risk of dying was much higher. But he was able to live and recover fully, and now there's a paper out about it. Hey,
see, at the end of the day, you could make your way into a white paper if you get through it alive. And I mean, so was it a mamba bite or?
It was a black mamba, an adult black mamba too.
Okay, yeah, so that's scary when
situation. So a stressful time for sure.
Yes, well, and that's a good point about the relationship with the private sector and the zoos, because it does seem like if somebody has the cure for this particular snake bite, they should just give it. But at the same time, like you said, now their staff is vulnerable if they're giving them all of the antivenom. And then not to mention the cost of it, because I think in a lot of those scenarios, the zoo isn't really reimbursed. Maybe eventually, but I think that's a harder thing to get.
Yeah, and we recently just started a project actually with poison control. They reached out to us yesterday to be consultants in their national database. And we are working on it.
And that's a big deal, by the way, for people. Like that's a pretty crazy thing to be happening. It's not
for medical. It's for sourcing and like non-native stuff, but it's still a big honor, of course. Mm-hmm. They are wanting us to look into creating a database of private sector keepers who do stock their own antivenom, and also private sector facilities that aren't AZA, because AZA already participates in this, but maybe like ZAA, like how we are. That would be willing to participate. And we've found a way, with the help of Kentucky Reptile Zoo, Kristen, she's been really helpful, to submit donation claims through the hospital, where they would be reimbursing everyone for the medication and the shipping, which most likely increase the chances of us taking care of our own people, like keeping that negative effect within the sector that it happened.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to add on to, even if you take money out of it, with the zoos having to give up their antivenom, or a private facility having to give their antivenom, it takes, for a lot of antivenoms, 6-9 months to order. Mm-hmm. So that's a long time that you are now.
We could get Thai Red Cross here in 2 weeks, but if we needed Australian antivenom, we're probably waiting 6 months, and the shipping is going to cost thousands of dollars.
Right. So it is a problem when somebody doesn't, when somebody's not prepared for this, it's a problem. Now, luckily with the native situation, that's a pretty simple issue to solve. There's lots of stock of anti-venom. You just go to the hospital and you're taken care of. But there's a lot of people. Sorry, say that again.
And native, if you have insurance, pretty much all insurance covers that, thankfully.
Okay,
even non-native type insurance typically will cover. It's just the anti-venom is not being reimbursed properly usually.
Right. So then that brings us to the scenario where you have private keepers keeping the exotic animals, and there's many examples of that, whether it's zoo is more of a public setting, but people can still get bit, and then obviously the totally private keepers. So let's discuss how you guys now are kind of involved in fixing this problem in order to make it so it's more seamless and hopefully save lives, really, and make sure that the practice of keeping and maintaining venomous snakes in captivity is not something that's putting people at an extreme risk unless they're being totally irresponsible. Do we want to start? How did this even come about? Like, where did this interest in venom come about, and then how did you start to decide to solve this issue?
I guess so. He doesn't spend a lot of time on social media, but like I spend a lot more on social media. It's really less stressful, honestly. But I think people kind of like when they talk about us and our facility, they tend to use words like extra. Like we're very obsessive about anything that we do. And he had been working with Venomous as a paid keeper at a private facility. Like he got mentored and then he worked there as his job before he ever kept. And then I later started at that same facility, worked there, got mentored, and then we opened our own facility. When we started opening our own facility, we started discussing the fact that this veterinarian that we previously worked under, he had access to antivenom at an AZA facility because he breeds snakes for AZA zoos. And he's a veterinarian, has medical connections. But now that we're separating and starting our own thing, we don't have that same coverage, and we can't like ask him for a favor for, us, which would be like very, next person doesn't work out realistically to ask that. So we started looking into it and we were shot down, immediately left and right. Oh, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh, they won't give you a permit. Oh, they won't do this. And we just basically kept asking people till we got back to the old timers of the community. And back in the day, like when I was just born, a lot of people actually did keep antivenom, and it was like $15 a vial, and the permit was like simply just having your doctor sign, and there was nothing to fill out really.
So there's a permit required to actually own the antivenom?
And a permit to import it, and it has to be updated as well regularly.
Gotcha.
They will take it from you if you do not follow the requirements. Typically, if you've like broken a big rule, I think that's when that becomes an actual threat. If you forget to do something, I don't think that's an actual problem. But there are people who have tried to lie on their paperwork for the purpose of reselling it to people who aren't permitted. And so that's when it becomes a federal crime and you can get it confiscated.
I'm so surprised anybody in the reptile industry would do that.
It is honestly shocking given that like how expensive it is, and then it would be marked up, that they wouldn't just
go through the proper steps and have it done.
I know.
So, go ahead, Jackson.
I was just going to say the permits cost $150.
Yeah, that's
it.
Yeah, they're very, very affordable. I don't know where the myth has came. I think when people look up the cost of antivenom, they see native antivenom and the cost to administer at hospitals, which is incredibly overcharged because of our American healthcare system, obviously. But non-native antivenom is often lyophilized, so it's in powder form. It's often incredibly cheap, or at least it lasts forever, so it's worth it still. Like Australian antivenom, it might be 10 grand for a full dose with a few $1,000s in shipping, but it lasts like 17 years after expiration. So almost your entire life of keeping is covered,
Right. And that's a good point. I think people, they think anti-venom and then they immediately think a huge dollar value. And because of the way insurance companies basically help skyrocket the cost of medical system, it really skews what things are actually worth. I mean, a tablet of Advil is not $80, but if you look at an invoice, that's what you'll see. So it is confusing. So, if the insurance company is paying for it, then I guess who cares what it costs? But if it's not, you're not being covered, then that becomes a problem. So I want to get into the anti-venom support group and everything, but maybe we'll take just a quick halt here to just discuss anti-venom in general. So I'm sure there are people that just really don't understand what it really is and how it works. So can we start with maybe we'll start with how it's made. You're talking about, if you're ordering it, it could be months for you to get it. Can we start there, and then we'll kind of build on top of that?
So the oversimplified version is we take the venom from the snake, we extract it, we microdose some large hoofstock, typically a horse, equine, and then they make the antibodies for that venom that helps counteract that. We take those antibodies out and we isolate them and go through a lot of medical magic, and then we get it into the actual liquid or lyophilized powder form.
Mm-hmm. It's actually a really elegant solution to that. You're essentially the proteins themselves are these foreign bodies that are going to be doing these wacky things in your body, and the body has the ability to create antibodies to fight that, but it takes too long in most cases. I imagine you're dead by the time you have enough antibodies to fight the venom. So you can just sort of administer like a bazooka load of it into a body and then get rid of all those foreign proteins.
Exactly.
And kind of along the way of that process, they discovered that snake venom does a lot of other stuff, and they've done, medical magic to make various medications and various types of testing and all sorts of stuff past, anti-venom.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple FDA-approved medications and tests, but outside of the U.S., the list just gets exponentially large.
Yeah. So is it made... I assume that the native species are made in the United States, and then the non-native species are made where those species are from, or is there a certain place in the world that most of this stuff is coming from?
Typically, yes.
But there is some overlap too.
Like one of the biggest suppliers for African antivenom is in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think, is it Brazil or Europe that's starting to work on some Australian stuff?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. Okay, so Australian antivenom is notorious for being really expensive, and so we're always looking to see if anyone's trying to tackle that field again. And it looks like Costa Rica has started some work on that a few years ago. They are probably going to be making powder version of what CSL already makes in Australia. So it's supposed to be a cheaper, easier to get option when they're done with that. The
reason that we say powder version or lyophilized is the lyophilized version is much more stable. It has a much longer shelf life. Yeah, that is preferred, but even current CSL liquid form does last 17 years after expiration.
So is the powdered version the same? Is that the same thing as the word allophilized? I've never heard this word before.
Lyophilized, yes.
Lyophilized, okay.
It
and that's the powdered. Okay.
Dehydrating.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you reconstitute it in a liquid before you administer it. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. And so what was the reason that Australian venom in particular is so expensive? Is it because less people are drawing venom from those animals, or?
Well, it's of course, so it's made in country, and they want to keep it in country as much as they can for their own people. So I think when they start outsourcing, the price goes up, as well as just getting it here. It is liquid and not powder, so it has to be refrigerated from the trip to Australia in a custom crate that tracks its location and its temperature the whole time. Mm. And if at any point it goes below the listed minimum or maximum or anything like that, they will snatch it back and take it back. And then it has to go through customs, and then you actually have to give the crate back at the very end. So that raises the shipping costs super dramatically.
Australian antivenom is also much more expensive per vial.
The vials are very large.
The vials are worth more than your typical other ones. So, for instance, to treat most Australian bites, you need 1 to 3 vials. Because they have 40,000 antivenom units. Whereas other envenomations for a different type of manufacturer or different snake could be 20 vials, 25 vials. So it might get in that price range either way. I think we're going to see a really big drop in cost once Costa Rica starts actually manufacturing. My bet is it's going to become really affordable.
And how much would a vial of Australian antivenom be, the larger one?
The polyvalent was around $2,200 a vial when we bought it.
I think shipping is about $3,000, and if you're going to pay to get that here, you might as well get the highest dose, which is 3 vials. So you're looking at $13,000.
Okay, and that's the. Oh no, go ahead, Jackson. Sorry.
But again, if you're getting it all the way from Australia and it takes that many months, I think most people do want to get the most coverage for their money.
Sure.
And also, just to explain, monovalent means it's meant for a specific species or a small group of species, whereas a polyvalent covers a wide range of species.
Right. Okay. So, and then in Australia, obviously they are home to some of the most toxic snakes on the planet. Yet they also have a similar death record. I think it's like 2 or 3 a year people die.
They have their medical stuff down.
Yeah, so they're very, and those are real super emergencies. If you get bit by something there, you got to get to the hospital soon. And in Australia, do they mostly use a polyvalent, so the sort of scatter shot method, or do they have enough identification where they can actually treat with a monovalent?
I'm not sure.
They are the only country that I know of anyways that has developed a test that they can take a blood sample and test which venom is in the blood.
Wow.
And so then they can use the monovalent, which is a little bit more effective versus the polyvalent.
And I think if you wanted to like get a further comment on that, Scott Epper, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but he's the Australian guy to go to for so if anyone listening to this wanted to know an in-depth Australian question, that would be the guy to go to.
He's really helpful.
But I do think also they are a lot more connected to nature, like in their communities and environment. When we talk to like regular people in Australia that we just happen to communicate with somehow, shape, or form, it's like their schools teach them about animals. They learn to identify things there. So I think that here in the United States, a lot of times we have very little knowledge of our own animals, let alone identifying something accurately in a time of like stress.
Yeah.
Have an educated populace.
Here they're cutting off the heads of garter snakes because they think it's a timber rattlesnake or something. You had mentioned, Jackson, the term crowfab. Is that a different type of antivenom as well, or is that just a different name for a polyvalent?
So I mentioned crowfab and Antivit. Those are two different antivenoms made by two different manufacturers. I believe Antivit's Bioclone, but don't quote me on that. But those are the antivenoms made for North American pit vipers.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Crowfab is the older one. Antivit came out in the last, I want to say, decade.
So that's just like a medical name for it.
Yeah, it's like saying aspirin or Tylenol.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. That makes sense. And then, so when somebody is extracting venom from a snake to produce, let's say, Australian antivenom, if they take one draw from a snake, is that enough? Like, how much do they need to make antivenom? Or it
takes more than we would expect.
I know it's a lot. I don't know the numbers.
I would not know the exact numbers. I could ask someone like Kristen Wiley at Kentucky Reptile Zoo, and I'm sure she'll tell me, but I am not entirely sure.
Yeah, because it seems like with Kristen and Jim, they're constantly extracting venom from snakes. It seems like an endless thing. Like you can't just do it a couple of times and be set and make a bunch. It's a pretty taxing thing to constantly have to produce the venom.
I know she's told me a few times, or I've seen posts at least, and I spoke at a conference with her not too long ago in Ohio, and she had showed some pictures of a decent amount of venom, and she was like, "Oh, this is only worth like X amount of money." And it was astronomically lower than I would have expected. So I think quite a bit of it is probably needed to manufacture and produce everything. If not, I would assume it would be worth more. I think they have to get that cost low because of how much is needed in the process.
Yeah. So I think that gives people a pretty good foundation for what antivenom is, how it gets made, why it costs so much. And so kind of dialing back to you guys trying to start your own center and get your own permits and get your own antivenom, you were hitting a bunch of roadblocks. And I think realizing that maybe this is not as simple as it ought to be.
We became very discouraged. And then... Let's see. I think so. I approached, after a while of looking into it, I approached Dr. Spencer Green, and he's pretty famous on social media for his toxicology work. And he immediately said, I will happily sponsor you. I've never sponsored anyone before, but I'm happy to let you be my guinea pig, and we can see how this goes. And I was like, phenomenal. Okay, how do I start the process? Because I'm having issues. And he was like, oh, I have no idea. I can sign for you. He is, I trust you. We've met many times in person. We've known each other for years. I'm happy to sign for you. I have no idea how to do this. And he didn't have anyone that he essentially knew how to do it either, because he's not on that side of things. He's on the medical side. So then I approached, I reached out to Tom Crutchfield. I reached out to zoos. I reached out to Thomas. He founded the Venomous Snake Mentorship. I reached out to Ray Morgan. Yeah, Ray Morgan. bunch of people essentially. And with little bits and pieces of help from those types of people, I was able to get where I thought I needed to go with the government. And that was the start of a 2.5-year process. And they had us filling out the wrong paperwork for 8 months.
Oh my gosh.
Then they had us filling out the right paperwork, but it was during COVID when all this happened. So typically they like allow like, I don't know, was it like a week to respond or something like that?
It was a long time.
During COVID, they were taking upwards of 90 days to respond. And they might respond with, oh, like you did this wrong, redo it. And you're waiting another 2 to 3 months for a simple thing. And you couldn't mail anything in during COVID because they were worried about contamination and stuff like that. So they had to start this whole thing where you had to have a special secure email, and we had to like sign papers foregoing that, saying we give permission because we're not going to pay hundreds of dollars to have a stupid email for just this. And that kept happening. And finally, I think around a year and a half in, we actually got the permits. And we were on the phone with the USDA and FDA and doctors and toxicologists literally multiple times a week for a year and a half. It was never ending. And we wrote everything that they ever said down, basically, on what the answer is, why that is, and like, can you do this? Can you do that? That type of thing. What's against the rules? What's allowed? Why is this even part of the paperwork? Because most of it was mumbo jumbo, had nothing to do with anti-venom, because most people are using this experimental drug import license to import other random stuff. And the BBIND, like all of the questions make no sense. If you look at the form, they're very weird. After a year and a half, we finally got that. And then, we got the import license as well. And then we went through the battle. We thought that was the big battle. We went through the battle of then actually being able to order anti-venom, because not a ton of people in our community actually had these permits. A lot of the people that did, they were old timers and they ordered it, 2 decades ago when I was a toddler. Mm-hmm. So these manufacturing companies haven't seen people like us come through with these permits. And a lot of them thought that we were like impersonating people or something. They would send us messages saying, we've blocked you from emailing us. Do not contact us again. Or they would respond, or they'd be like, is this a scam? And so we had to get people like Kristen Wiley to be like, hey, can you help us with the connection? Or, Dr. Brandon Hoff, we were like, hey, can you put us in an email with this person and let them know that this is legit? And once that started happening, we started building this massive database of connection information of like, okay, this is what it costs. This is how much you have to buy. This is how much the shipping is. This is the minimum order requirements. And here's the price changes if you order this much versus this much. And this is the email you want to message. This is whenever you message, you want to say specifically this and nothing else. And we did all of that and basically made a massive database. And then at around the 2.5-year mark, that's when we said, okay, no one else is probably going to want to do all this. Let's put it all together and make it to where everyone else can access it. And that's kind of how the group was made.
The best part about providing high-quality reptile husbandry is you get to develop a long-term relationship with your animal. Meet Jackson, my 18-year-old crested gecko. Jackson lives on the BioDudes Terrafauna substrate, which is one of their substrates that's specifically designed for warm biomes and humidity spikes. Like all other BioDudes substrates, it contains organic content to help support the plant life in Jackson's vivarium. It also holds moisture very well, which means humidity is never an issue, even in my dry climate. Another favorite of mine is the BioDudes Bug Grub. This is a supplement powder made from natural ingredients like carrots, beets, spirulina, oats, and potatoes. Everybody knows how important gut-loading feeder insects is, and this simplifies it for me and allows me to be confident when I feed both Jackson and my tarantulas that they're getting the nutrients they need to thrive. Also, if you have a lot of babies right now, this is a great way to help fortify the diets of neonatal reptiles. The BioDude has a ton of great educational content on both his YouTube channel and the website, all about bioactive care, and it's just one of those brands that's doing their part to push herpetoculture into a positive direction and give reptile keeping a better name. It seems like it's crazy that you two had to be the trailblazers for this. It just doesn't. Everybody's just been kind of winging it this whole time.
There wasn't very many people that did this, to be honest with you. When we first completed this and a bunch of people started submitting their paperwork, there was talk of like the USDA and the FDA being like, hi, so why are there literally dozens upon dozens of y'all suddenly sending this in? Mm-hmm. Like in my entire job here, I've been working here 2 years. I've never helped one of these be filled out before. And now suddenly there's 25 people in the waiting queue.
one thing I want to mention, particularly with the BBIND, which is the FDA permit that allows you to keep it in the States, it's for the non-regulated drug. Because it's for an experimental drug and it's meant to be used in like research studies, there's a lot of questions that don't pertain to antivenom, and they look really scary. And you, like she said, mumbo jumbo, you leave them blank.
Yeah. And if you put something in there, you would think you're supposed to check something or say something. If you put something in there, you're going to be denied because you filled out a part that's not relevant to you.
Like you're just trying to do your best to fill out everything and basically having to make up answers.
Yeah, about half of the permit you leave blank.
Really?
Yes. And I will say, so Kristen Wiley has helped a few people that have like asked her through these forms. And something else to mention, I guess, before I say this, since we started this little organization group, whatever you want to call it, they have changed the paperwork 3 times already. And so Kristen, long before, she's been in this community professional long before, I was born. She's helped some people through as well, like people like us who came to her years prior and stuff. And back when it was a little bit easier as well, and on a much, much smaller scale, because they're very, very busy people, obviously. But there has not been anyone ever that's like sat down and done this before. So I think people were really excited to jump on board, and it kind of funneled more resources our way. And a lot of people in the professional setting, once they saw what was going on, they were like, oh, we would like to help you. And that made the group exponentially larger and filled with resources that no one else has had before. There was another thing I was going to say.
Which part?
Before that, there were people who did try to do what's called an anti-venom bank. And Florida has their own, they had Venom 1, and I think it's now like Venom 2 or something. There was some bankruptcy issues because of people taking bites back to back and like not contributing to the pool and whatnot. I'm not exactly sure what all the issues were. I spoke to some of the people who did help found that, and they said basically it was a lot of monetary issues. And so when I first started doing all this too, I did actually go the route of wanting to do a Texas anti-venom bank. And I had some pretty big names that were willing to support us. And we talked to lawyers, we talked to insurance brokers, we talked to doctors, we talked to government officials. And basically they were like, Texas would not be willing to play ball. And realistically, with the size of the state of Texas, you are going to have so many problems. And so we were hoping to do national, not Texas. And they were like, basically laughed at us. And they were like, no, like there's so many legalities. There's so many insurance issues. Venom 1 happened before all that was a thing, and now the government is involved with Venom 1. The government here does not want to play ball. So that's why we were like, okay, if we can't get a bank of anti-venom, let's get everyone their own anti-venom.
Yeah.
And I wasn't the first one to try that. I just want to point that out, that a ton of people did try, but we were all unsuccessful.
Yeah. Interesting. So what was I going to say with the... I forget. I'll come back to it. So anyway, we're talking about the anti-venom support group for the. I don't think we actually mentioned the name. So that's what you guys have started. So maybe you essentially have gone. Oh yeah, but I do remember now. Before I go down the anti-venom support group thing. So once you finish the process, before maybe you kind of started the group, you obviously got your permit, and then you acquired anti-venom. And what did you like? How much was that first purchase and shipment? And I'm sure that was expensive. And B, like, how did it feel to actually have that process complete?
I think we bought African anti-venom as our first purchase. We got Insert, which is we got it because we work with one of the largest collections of mambas out there. The man who mentored and trained us, he is a mamba fanatic, and we picked that up with him. So we wanted that really badly because that's a drop you dead type of snake. We spent $2,500, I think.
It was 2,500, and we got 10 vials.
We got 10 vials. We're probably going to get a few more just to have a little bit surplus. So maybe total $3,000, but it covers almost all of our African species.
It's the African polyvalents are really good about having a wide coverage.
And I will say, I thought that we don't feel nervous working with these snakes, because I think that if you're truly nervous, you are not going to handle them safely and effectively. But there's always that really healthy respect for what they're capable of. I thought it would make me feel a little bit safer in the back of my head. And funny enough, after going through all of this work and spending all this money, I think it made me even more cautious because I do not want to have to use it.
Yes, yeah. Now you have this very precious resource.
A lot
Yeah,
of
that makes
people have
sense.
told me that doing all of this made them more careful rather than more reckless. And I really love that that's kind of like a wide effect for all the people who have purchased it.
Well, I'm sure gives your families a peace of mind, though,
Yes.
knowing that there's anti-venom right there.
Yes.
Yes.
They
Is it-
definitely they've asked that the whole, time from when we went to mentorship to a paid job to our own facility. That's always been a question along the way, but regular people don't understand the nuances. So
yeah.
this multi-year process to them seemed silly.
So how do you store it? Just out of just curiosity, where is it in your facility, and is it kind of protected somewhere in a fridge or?
So we just built a new reptile house actually, and it's a very big rectangular building. There's a non-venomous side and then a venomous side, and this is the display building. We have a private one as well. But when you walk into the venomous side, there is a roughly 7x7 room. You need a fingerprint or a key code to get inside of that room from the porch. And in there's, a little countertop, and then there's this wine cooler, and it has dual zones. So we have a zone for lyophilized and for liquid, because those are stored at slightly different temperatures. The liquid, it has much more, like a much narrower zone of what's acceptable. The lyophilized has a much wider zone. You can technically store it at room temperature, but cooler, we've always been told by everyone in the field that actually makes it last a little bit longer. And the liquid has to be stored pretty cold. It's more like fridge temperatures versus wine cooler. And then in that room, straight ahead of the door you just entered, is another door that you need a either fingerprint or key code to get into, and that's actually the display venomous building.
So can I ask like a little airlock?
Yeah, it's an airlock. It's basically a second layer of protection in case a snake were to somehow escape its cage. It would have to go through multiple exterior doors inside the building. But that's where we store the anti-venom as well, because God forbid someone we know took a bite, they would just need the code to that first door, and they could go grab our anti-venom for whoever needed it in the fridge and then leave, and they would never have access to our snakes. So that's how we did it that way, as well as EMS doesn't have to enter the snake room if we needed to call emergency services. But we do, because of our property and the way that it is, we're out in the middle of the boonies, we're on a big piece of land. EMS response time is 38 minutes. So we have a 2-person rule that no one is working with venomous unless there's someone else to drive them in case there's an emergency.
And so let's just say, God forbid, there is an emergency. With the anti-venom, is this something that you administer yourself, or is the goal to just take that to the hospital?
Thankfully, we have, even though we are out in the boonies, we have an emergency room that, we've spoken with and we've worked with roughly 11 minutes. 11 minutes from us. So for us, we would personally choose to drive ourselves because of the property orientation and how weird it is. But for most people, you would just, call 911 for an ambulance, and you would take what you call a go bag. When you go through that whole process with the FDA and the USDA, they ask you all these questions to kind of make you have an emergency action plan. That's actually part of it. You have to have one written down, and your doctor has to approve it. So our emergency action plan details what we're supposed to do no matter what snake it is. And then we take the bite protocol for being treated for the actual snake. And what we would do is our cages, we just started this part, but our cages will have a little color coordination thing on them. So let's say we got bit by a black mamba. We would look at what code is on the cage. So it's a blue circle, get the snake back into the cage immediately, grab the box that has the blue circle on it, and then grab the go bag, and everything will be in that. And then we head to the hospital immediately. So it'd be like I don't know, 2 or 3, depending upon how long it took to get the snake back, it'd be like a 2 or 3 minute process. And then we'd immediately be on the road to the hospital. And thankfully with our second double door thing, we can just remove ourselves from the room and then lock the door as well. Because we have custom plumbing, custom lighting, all that. So the snake cannot escape the room.
Okay. That's fascinating. And then one more question before we get back to the group. Let's just say you have a infamous Texas ice storm, power goes out. What do you do in that scenario as far as trying to keep the anti-venom cool?
So we have a Generac.
Okay.
And it's underneath our porch, and he actually custom wired our entire building. It's got all these the whole building is a smart home. Basically, it's really fancy. So the Generac, after the power turns off due to power outage, whatever happens, it will actually just turn right on automatically.
It sounds like an amazing setup you guys have.
We built it by hand, literally from the ground up, the whole building. It's a nice little reptile house. It's almost done. We got quoted a astronomical price during COVID that was like enough to buy a home. So we said we're going to build it ourselves.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you, and plus then you can have more control over the design and all the, the form and the function. That sounds pretty amazing. So, okay, so back to the group. Now, the point of the anti-venom support group is to help people go through this entire process so they don't have to go through all of this. So how does it look if somebody, let's say somebody wants to get into keeping a venomous snake and they are responsible, so they think the very first step is I want to have my own stock of anti-venom. They go to the group, and what sort of things will they encounter?
So when you get added to the group, we add people slowly because of how tedious it is helping each person. So some people will think that we have like blocked them or like stopped them from entering the group, but that's not true. It sometimes could take anywhere from 3 days to like 2 weeks to get in the group. That's typical. We let in people and we tag them in the introduction post, which alerts them to how to find the guides on the group. And then we have all of the guides listed out with a description, and then it goes into further detail of each section. And each one, like we essentially leave contact information for how to get a hold of us, because some people will walk through these and do this whole process and we won't even talk to them. And they'll shoot us a message afterward and be like, hey, I literally just ordered medication because of you guys, and we've never spoken to them. Some people want us to walk through them each step because it really depends on your scenario. It can be very difficult depending upon the nuances. And so we will set up virtual phone calls, we will send voice messages, and we'll spend hours with people going through the paperwork. If we know them well enough and we've had a relationship on social media for quite a while, we can actually privately approach a doctor and say, hey, would you be willing to sponsor this person? I can vouch this, this, and this. And if not, we will send them an in-depth amount of information to approach their doctor with, so that their doctor feels comfortable and their doctor has resources to reach out to essentially know what they're signing for.
Because you need a doctor to sign off on your, because essentially you're storing medication, so you can't just do that as a citizen.
No, unfortunately, you do have to have a doctor, and that is one of people's biggest holdups. They used to think that you had to have a toxicologist, but that's not true. Just your normal physician that you go to for your yearly appointments is capable of signing this for you. And from what we've seen historically, now that the group is here, now that there's a massive information pool and that your physician can reach out to somebody like Dr. Green and just say, hey, like there's no liability risk for me signing this, right? Like this is okay to do, and what exactly am I agreeing to? They all feel a lot more comfortable now with all this background information laid out. We have a ton of people, like I think actually more than the toxicologists. We have probably double that are using their own regular everyday doctors. And they get that signature and then they, submit everything. They go back and forth with the FDA and the USDA, and their permits will eventually arrive virtually. They'll send, the email with information, and they tell you have to wait about 30 days to actually do anything with the permits, and then they can start ordering.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it is just like I said, it's kind of crazy that this is the first time that this has all been compiled in a place where it's easy to access. And like, how many people do you think own, I mean, this is probably an impossible question to answer, but because you guys have your finger on the pulse as far as the venomous keeping community, are there a lot of people who keep privately who just are not interested in acquiring anti-venom, like they just kind of jump the step? Yeah, Jackson's nodding his head.
And I will say we've seen a massive shift since we started this, and like other people, have started promoting more of like a
dispelling this information.
Yeah. Once people have realized that it's basically laid out all for them now. Like if you get on the phone with us and we walk you through it, you will be done with this paperwork in less than an hour, and $150. You can get in on group orders, this and that. I think now that everyone's aware of that, most people are actually really excited about keeping it. Most people are really excited about getting it. There is a small little niche portion of people that are notorious for problems already and kind of like, having other much larger issues than that believe that it's illegal and that you're stealing medication from foreign countries, which is obviously not true. But it has been a little bit of a group that's created some rumors around this.
And One thing as well that I want to mention is we've talked a lot about the expensive ones, Australia being one of the most expensive. Africa is kind of mid range.
Well, if you're keeping black mambas, it's going to be on the mid, but if you're not, it's going to be a little bit lower.
But a lot of people keep Asiatic cobras and vipers, right? You can get a full dose of thyroid cross, either neuropolyvalent or hematopolyvalent, for around $900.
Yeah, like we just helped 3 different people in Texas. I placed the order yesterday at Wells Fargo and had the money wired to Thailand. All of them spent about $800, like each $800 each. They got an entire dose that will cover any of their Asiatic species in their whole collection for $800, and it lasts roughly 2 decades after expiration. So they've got 20 years of coverage for dozens of snakes for $800.
That is crazy. So yeah, I think there is a lot of myths with this, and those myths actually probably promote people not to even try to investigate buying anti-venom because they're so afraid of the cost.
Most of the people who are like super against it, once they realize that that's not legit and they were provided evidence that it wasn't legit, I would say like 90 to 80% of people have shifted to, you should have anti-venom if you can afford it, or I can guide you to this group that I know with these people, or like dispelling the myths, even if they're not stocking themselves. And I've seen a lot of people start saying things like, oh yeah, I used to want this species, but their anti-venom costs this much, so I'm actually going to look at this species, which is amazing. They're like making decisions on keeping certain animals based upon the availability of the anti-venom.
And it's been really great over the past year to see like the kind of ripple effect of people dispelling the myths outside of the group now, even, and like going into other places and seeing, quotes about shelf life and cost and everything that are accurate.
Those same effects that you see when husbandry information comes out, where people are so excited to like help and teach people, they're doing that same thing with this.
Yeah. And so I'm obviously familiar with the pushback that you can get in those scenarios with the old school kind of people that have been doing it one way for a long time. But it makes it, to me, I don't understand if you can buy something for $1,000 that's going to potentially save your life. It makes and not only your life. I mean, reptile keepers are very bad at understanding that we live in a community, and that, if your animal gets out and God forbid bites somebody, you are responsible for that. And maybe you're the tough guy that can take a bite and you don't care that you're going to lose your fingers, but are you going to feel the same way when the toddler next door takes a bite? You need, there is a sense of responsibility that you need to have. And I think to be able to dispel those myths and to have people kind of making decisions based on that makes so much sense to me. And you'd mentioned the shelf life a couple of times. I think maybe Jackson, you just mentioned it. And Zoe, you've mentioned a few times it's good for 20 years post expiration date. So I'm curious, what is the expiration date that's listed on the bottles? And then when you say post, like 20 years post expiration date, is that just because technically it's expired, but it's still going to function as advertised?
So the thyroid cross that we put the order in for yesterday, the bottle says it expires in 2029. And then there have been studies that these are all listed on the group.
We have them listed on the group too. We could link them.
But they do efficacy studies for, 17, 15, 20-year post-expiration antivenom. Some of it that's even been misstored, right? Either too hot or frozen. And it still neutralizes the venom.
And
and there's no adverse effects.
Typically, they'll say something like it's neutralized like 99.9%. So basically, it's functioning at full force 20 years after it was supposed to be expired.
And even if it's not, even if it's functioning at 90%, that's still better than 0%.
That's the other thing that, our doctors who sponsor us that we work with, the other thing they said is something is better than nothing. Anti-venom doesn't become toxic or poisonous as it ages. That's something to think about. It like 10 old vials is way better than 0 vials,
Right.
But and like they stress fully, like, don't throw that away when it expires. Do not throw it away. You do, and that's the other thing they talk about. A lot of people worried about over purchasing, like if all these venomous keepers started purchasing so much that the countries who needed it wouldn't have it. There's a lot of things put into place that would never even allow that to happen. But the other thing we have to think about is you do not need to repurchase it in 3 years when it expires. In 10 years or 15 years, that's worth it to consider talking about repurchasing, but not throwing away the other stuff. Dr. Green, I believe, was it referenced that he'd used some antivenom that was like 25 or 35 years old and it worked perfectly.
For sure. Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really amazing. I mean, you can understand why the company doesn't want to have like a 40-year shelf life or expiration date. It doesn't make sense to put themselves liable that way. But you're, like you said, Zoe, you're not dealing with a product that's going to become toxic. You're just dealing with a product that maybe become less efficacious, but it's not necessarily, like you said, it's better than nothing. Even if it's has lost 20% of its ability to neutralize the venom, why would you throw that away?
Right.
And realistically, if we're saying something lasts 20 years and we're talking about venomous snakes that are capable of possibly killing you, you're already going to start this keeping process probably around the age of like 18 or 20 at minimum, like you're not going to be keeping at 10, so 20 plus 20, you're already at 40 years old. If you had to buy it one more time, 60 something years old, 70 something years old, you're approaching the point where you probably aren't going to be working with, the most deadly snakes in the world at 80 anymore. You've probably slowed down and, like let your collection slowly go off on its own, I would hope at that point, because, you're getting old enough that you don't need to be working with them. So buying 2 doses throughout your life. And that's only if, a lot of people have already been here a long time. They're in their 20s and 30s. So buying 1 dose will probably cover the entire time that they keep for their life.
Yeah. You're probably talking like 25 to 50 cents a day or something like that, or even less of an investment.
Up for us, and it was something so silly, like a few dollars a day, and we have a massive collection compared to most people.
Yeah, so it's just a no-brainer. And now what about the bite protocol? Because that's kind of another piece of it. You had mentioned the bite protocol as well, but of course the anti-venom plays a massive role in that. But I think you're also working, what's the foundation that you're working with? Is it Asclepius or... Asclepius?
Asclepius Snake Bite Foundation.
Yeah, so that's like the Jordan Benjamin, Jason Bolt, Nick Brandyhoff. There's a ton of doctors and professionals, Kate Jackson. That's like a group of like 20 people at this point. We once we founded the anti-venom support group, we had been harassing those doctors along the way, essentially, especially Dr. Green and Dr. Brandyhoff. They kind of saw that, and Nick specifically was like, we attended their conferences as well. After one of the conferences in 2023 at
Denver.
In Colorado? Yeah, in Colorado. Afterwards, he approached us and he was like, hey, do you want to be a part of our foundation? We feel like you could contribute. And we were like, we don't have medical backgrounds. He was like, no, I know that, obviously. We need people who are able to like do the work and have some background knowledge and stuff like that and want to put in the effort. Part of the foundation. And we were like, oh, we're so honored. Thank you so much. Maybe like 2 or 3 weeks after that, he was like, we've been toying with the idea of making some really advanced specific bite protocols for the private sector, but we don't have the manpower. We think this project is perfect for y'all to take over. And we were like, oh yes, we would love to do this. And so we've been working on that for a little over a year now. And we've finally approached the point where the doctors are starting to put in this in-depth medical information. And we've compiled the safety stuff, like how to lay it out, making sure it matches all of, all the fonts are correct, the way that it's put together, and how we were going to say that like this bite is worse than this one. How do you look for this? The descriptions of the snakes, what they eat, all that kind of stuff, the pictures. We've got all that pretty much done. So we have a few months out, and we'll probably release them in sections. Like we'll release this many, this many, this many, and it's all going to be available online. And what's really cool, that's never been done before, these are going to be totally free. There is not going to be a charge. Historically, you pay $200 to $300 for this. And there's no way to update it because it's historically on paper. And so this is going to be updated as it needed. And this is actually made by toxicologists treating non-native bites, which, again, historically has never been done. They
have a clinic in Guinea that they go to several months of the year.
They're opening multiple other clinics in Africa, and they are the doctors that treat all of the exotic bites in the States.
Wow.
And at the end of that little book, there's going to be a lovely page with contact information for these specific doctors that your doctor can access to consult with them privately if you were bit, so they, no matter what doctor you go to, you would have the best treatment results possible. And that, again, has historically never happened. So I think it's going to be really, really helpful. Most of the doctors who participated in this have the ability, I don't know what kind of special licensing is required, but they have the ability to consult virtually nationally. So that is really going to help because that your insurance will cover that if you have insurance. Their consults virtually, and also if it's between life and death, you're just gonna do it either way.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like a tremendous amount of work for not having a price tag on it. So for you guys, is it just totally out of the good of your heart, or are you able to kind of get a kickback on this at some point? Because it seems like no, it's just time.
No, we've made sure the anti-venom support group is entirely free, and we are making sure these bite protocols are entirely free. And the doctors in the foundation, that we're partnered with, that are instrumental to this process. We couldn't do it without them, obviously. They also wanted it to be behind no paywalls at all. They are allowing donations, so you can donate to the foundation, and believe it or not, the donations will not go to the doctors at all. They don't take any sort of pay for being a part of the foundation. It would just go to cover bites in Africa for these populations of people that do not have any money. They need stuff for the clinic and stuff. So if people do choose to donate, it's going to a phenomenal cause. They're saving children all over the world, as well as like entire, what's the proper word? Like communities in Africa.
They're currently trying to set up a clinic in Congo.
Yeah. And it's real. If you look, I have to pull up the statistics in a minute, but they've taken X number of snake bites that resulted in death typically and dropped that number down to like nothing where their clinic.
So it's going to a great cause if you do make a donation, and hopefully people do make donations, because it seems like, because I guess prior to there being something like that, everybody was up to their own devices to create their own bite protocol, or maybe go find like an online version that was sort of hacked together.
Set of older ones that someone else in the community has made. I think we own them. We own the old set that's a flash drive. We own the old binder, and we own the old individual ones that were released after. But like I said, there's the ones that we're coming up with have all of these new features and new circumstances that have never been done before. So it's going to be something that's like, there's nothing on the market like it, but also it's free. And that's the really, really important part, is there's no excuse for anyone not to have one at that point.
So now you can give this out, like print out copies and give them out at expos where you are selling snakes.
That's something that we don't sell a ton of venomous snakes, but that's something we're going to implement. Anyone who ever buys a venomous snake from us is going to get a protocol. When the snake is shipped, they're going to get the protocol as well. And I think any breeder or keeper would be able to do that as well.
That's amazing. And so basically, if someone has a group of venomous animals that they're keeping, they would just go to the website and then find the species that they're working with, and they'll be able to download it as a digital version and then create a binder or something for their home collection, like physical copy, however they want to do it.
Since we have, like I said, a larger collection, what we do is we have, for the previous stuff, we have the entire flash drive of as many species as they sell in a binder, and then we have a second binder that has only the species that we're currently keeping in there. And that binder is in our go bag so that we can just grab it and we don't have to look for each thing. And so for people who have normal sized number of animals, normal sized collections, I think that you can just print off all the animals that you have, and then maybe any that you consider getting in the future, so you don't forget,
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're interested in getting a collets in the future, just go ahead and print that one off, so that God forbid you get it and something were to happen, you don't think about that later, but also so that you've read the collets bite protocol before you even purchase it, and you know exactly what it's capable of.
Now, how different is the protocols by species? I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's get your butt to the hospital with anti-venom if you can, or make sure you understand that the hospital may not know where to get the anti-venom and those things. But is there like physical things that you should do differently? I mean, obviously you're talking about if it's a neurotoxic venom, you could be losing the ability to breathe, organ failure. If you're talking about hemotoxin, maybe tons of pain, whatever it is. How different is the protocol?
The pre-hospital is pretty similar across the board, except for a special case, which I'll talk about in 1 second. And then the medical stuff is going to be pretty similar for any neurotoxic in that region or hemotoxic in that region. And so a lot of it is like the same thing for all these species. Yeah. But it's really nice to be able to have like this specific species, so you feel more comfortable with that. More.
Sure.
I'm blanking on the word. Anyways. But the special case is like there are some, especially with the more neurotoxic elapids, where there might be some slightly different bite protocol stuff. Where, for instance, Australian elapids, their venom stays in the lymphatic system, and then it travels to your heart and your lungs and causes cardiac and respiratory distress, which is obviously not good things, right? So in Australia, the snakebite kits do actually come with a proper tourniquet, not somebody with a belt and a stick, and gets it to the right pressure where it cuts off just the lymphatic system,
Yeah, I actually
not
find you where
the veins.
specifically do it.
And that can help tremendously in preventing effects from an Australian elapid if you're going to be more than 30 minutes before you get antivenom. If you're within 20 to 30 minutes, you probably shouldn't use a tourniquet because the tourniquet has the potential to do a lot of damage.
Okay.
But past that, that could be life-saving.
And thankfully, whenever you go through this whole process, a lot of the questions that you're asking right now and that people would ask realistically, you have to know the answer to get your permits. So it kind of forces people to really think about these unique scenarios and think about the what if and plan for the what if.
Right.
It's not as simple as them just asking about import questions. They're asking all the whys and all that.
Yeah, you're having to go through the scenario in your head. Yeah, and then getting back to the tourniquet, Jackson, I assume you don't put a tourniquet on if it's a hemotoxin. I think, is it because it just keeps the blood in? Like, you'd rather that venom flow through the body and do less damage.
So again, we're not doctors, so oversimplified version. The hemotoxic is typically going to cause a lot of local damage, local swelling, local necrosis, but it's not going to necessarily affect your nervous system. It's hemotoxic. It's not going to affect your heart or your lungs so much. So if you restrict that to just your hand, you're likely going to lose your hand when you might not have otherwise. Whereas the neurotoxic, it causes less localized symptoms, right? Less necrosis, less swelling. So, but it stops your heart and your lungs. So if you keep that localized to the hand, you have a better outcome. And in the end, it's about like life of a limb.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Where they may have more of a mix.
Makes sense.
In North America, time is tissue, but when you get outside of North America, time is not only tissue; it's death.
And just any native snakebite, don't use a tourniquet.
Okay, that's good to know. And that's the other thing too, is maybe you're in a weird town you've never been to, you get bit or whatever. You can't necessarily rely on the medical staff there to understand what to do, right? Because it can be such a bizarre thing. If I got bit in the middle of Canada, I don't even know what would happen. I'd probably die or something, because it's, there's just, the experience is going to be very low on the medical because they just don't see it. So it's nice to be able to give them that. And it's written, doctors have put it together so they know what a doctor wants to see with an instruction manual, essentially, right? So it becomes very easy for them to follow and make sure they're not cutting your arm off to save your, to stop the venom from flowing or something like that.
Exactly.
Is there any, we'll wrap up talking about your facility a little bit more. I'm curious about the animals that you're keeping and how you guys even, started this. Oh, do you have something else you want to add to that, Jeff?
I was going to say one more major benefit that we've seen from the ASG and from people being more responsible, because you had talked about responsibility earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that with all of this, it's shown a more responsible face to the general public, more responsible front. And there was actually a bill back in 2023, I think April 2023.
I don't think we publicly talked about this at the time,
but
we kept it a little quiet.
In Texas, they were trying to make a regulation that to keep venomous, you had to live within 50 miles of a hospital that stocks antivenom for that species.
But hospitals don't stock non-native, so it was an actual all-out ban.
It's a blanket ban on non-native exotics. And the antivenom support group and people privately keeping antivenom was specifically brought up as a reason against that, and the bill did not pass.
We approached the government privately and basically made them aware of this movement with all of this going on, that people were doing it by choice. And we were told that had an effect in the decision-making process. And
it was not the only.
Yeah, we've never really discussed it out loud because we're not sure how big of an effect it had. We don't want to take any false credit, but I think that that's something amazing that you can, put forward as a community.
So having this responsible front is really helpful for legislation or just in general, community perception.
Oh, that's amazing. And I'm sure it did have some positive effect on that bill. That's an incredible story. And it's so true. and this is sort of a thread that runs through this entire show, is that front facing responsibility. You have to know that there are most people, 95 out of every 100 people, have no understanding of why you might even want to keep a reptile in a captive setting, or whether it's a zoo or a home set. So you have to approach it with that in mind, and you can't just jump to the fact that, yeah, I keep a bunch of cobras in my basement, and that's cool. You're never gonna win anybody over. But if you can say, hey, look at this entire like medical literature we put together and this process to help people acquire the proper anti-venom, and it's going to help not only the private keepers who keep them, but also people who are maybe publicly could have an accident or anything like that. You want to show that we have this responsible side to our community.
Exactly. Yeah, that's worded perfectly.
Before we jump into your facility, is there any other like random venom myths or anti-venom myths that we didn't hit that you wanted to make sure that we clear up? People electrocuting themselves, or weird stuff like that.
I think another thing that we were really shocked by. We are very science-oriented people, so when we hear or see strange things, we like to investigate them. So for us, like, that's always been a normal thing to check when things are said. But the general public doesn't always do that, especially if they don't keep these animals. Like, they're not going to go binge, 2 hours of research. But we have seen this really big myth across the board of people who keep and don't, that anti-venom is more dangerous than being envenomated. People think that anti-venom kills more people, and so it's not safe to actually treat with. Now, there was a minor amount of truth, not to that extent, but there was a minor amount of truth to that 25 years ago when I was a toddler. But now modern day antivenoms are incredibly safe. And the only really issue you have to worry about sometimes is, anaphylaxis. And you're already going to be in a hospital. If you're receiving antivenom, they can easily handle that. So it's a moot point, basically. And the doctors have really stressed that to a lot of people, that modern antivenoms do not have these same problems. And even if you did have anaphylaxis, it would be easily treated at the hospital you were already at.
So what was the issue 25 years ago? My first gut was to say anaphylaxis, but I imagine it was something else that was causing issues.
I think there were less stringent requirements in making it as well.
There's more serum sickness because, and again, I'm not a doctor, but the older ways of collecting antivenom use this full protein, the IgG protein. And again, I don't do a great job of explaining it, but it was caused more adverse reactions because the bottom of this protein fit into other receptors. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Now they use the Fab2 proteins, which have the that little tail cut off. And
okay. That's ringing a bell. Actually, I think you had mentioned Ray Morgan earlier. I think in his Venom interviews, like the DVD.
Right?
And I could have completely said that wrong, but
no, I think that's ringing a bell. And I think if anybody's really wanting to know, I think he has like a real cool animation. I might be remembering wrong, but I've seen now that you're saying it, it's ringing a bell of an animation of showing how it's changed over time. I want to say it's in the Venom interviews movie, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, that'd be a great resource. But back in the medieval ages, we had theriac, which was a paste of different herbs that they would put on the wound. You can imagine that didn't have
We made a video about antivenom over time, and it was really interesting learning about how far it's come.
Well, it goes back to kind of how I opened the show with how bizarre being envenomated is, because of how tiny the volume of the substances that can cause serious damage. So you just rewind the clock a couple hundred years, and you're literally talking about magic, essentially. Like, this snake bites you, you see 2 tiny pinpricks, and your hand falls off.
Snake either. They just fell over randomly.
Exactly. So I'd be putting all sorts of stuff on my arm.
And with people being scared of the medication, people also have this idea that once you've been treated once, you can't be treated again. That's also total hogwash. I don't know where that came from. Not real. And then people also think that they can be allergic to the snake itself, and having an allergic reaction to the actual venom requires prior exposure to that venom, meaning you have already been bit before, or you've been spitting cobras. That would be prior exposure without a bite. You've been regularly around it, inhaling it, getting on your skin all over the place. That would be it. So a lot of people, they don't really understand what a venomous snake even means to them. They think that they can just have allergic reaction and fall over and die, but that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people do become allergic to a lapid venom, for example, but it's because they work with them and they're constantly exposed to the dust.
Very seriously, you wear a respirator. You can have filtration systems in your building at a minimum, just cover your eyes. But we also have a commercial eye wash station even.
Right. And maybe it's worth saying for we could have maybe mentioned this earlier, but if there are folks out there that really don't understand how large the protein molecules are in venom, I mean, you can put it on your hands, you could, theoretically drink it, and you're not going to have an issue. It has to be punched into the.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It tastes very metallic.
Oh, do you know?
Yeah.
The spinning cover, sometimes they get it in your mouth.
Okay, see, that's terrifying.
Like a shield like this, it can go up underneath you, which is why we now wear full respirators.
But just say you had like a cut in your mouth. Are you kind of panicked, or is that
I mean, at that point, I would start worrying. If you had an open, actively like bleeding wound, I would be nervous. Typically, if you get, people don't take being spit on seriously like they take being bit. And
I've personally never heard of envenomation.
I've never heard of it. A doctor or someone in the field would probably know more. I don't know if there's anyone having had that happen before, but there's plenty of people we know that get spit in the eyes, and when they start rubbing it and pushing it deep in and that actually causes a lot of problems. That can actually lead to blindness and permanent damage. Thankfully, if you immediately start to cleanse it and you do not rub it in, you are normally going to be good.
Okay, but yeah, it just goes. What's that?
Lots of flushing the eyes out.
Lots of flushing, yeah, and just
it'll just go through your system. Like nothing will happen to you if you swallow it. Like I said before, we realized how dangerous spit was. We had been spit in the mouth more than once. They have great aim.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. But yeah, so it has to be punctured in through the skin into the blood system or lymphatic system, like you're saying before. So let's talk a little bit about the facility. You've already laid it out a little bit how it's sort of incredible, and we'll get to Zoe in a second, but because I think your story is kind of very interesting how you came to the zoo world. But Jackson, it sounds like you maybe have been an animal person always, or you spent lots of time working in this setting?
We both have, actually. I started my journey in reptiles. Okay. She started in mammals. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I went to A&M. And while I was a student there, I started working at this private facility for that veterinarian that we mentioned. And it was just taking care of 200 to 300 venomous snakes.
Wow.
Probably like 300 to 400 at that time.
Yeah, it was a little bit back then. And it, like we said, it's the largest collection of mambas in the States that we know of. He has around 60 to 70 mambas right now.
Wow.
So
that's how you kind of got started.
A lot up front, right? Like very quick.
And we've known him for years at this point. The man who owns the veterinarian, and he's getting older, despite being in perfect health. So we've actually we've sat down and had conversations and got lawyer papers drawn up to one day transfer his entire collection to us. And
wow.
we already have an equal size collection to him at this point. So we are pre-planning for entire buildings that we don't even own the snakes yet. I
didn't keep any venomous before I met Zoe, though I did work with a lot of non-venomous, or I worked with venomous.
I mean, you were employed as a job to take care of hundreds of them.
I kept non-venomous, and I kept monitors and stuff, mm-hmm. But then we met and we started the facility. And
once we had a serious relationship, we bought property, and that's when we actually dove into keeping our own venomous rather than just working with them in a paid setting.
Gotcha. And Zoe, you were mentioning to me before that you actually took a totally different career path originally. Were you already I'm assuming you were an animal person. You it sounded like you're kind of going down a different path. I'm sure you still had animals involved in your life in some capacity, but.
So my family was really big into animals, of all different kinds. When I was growing up, my dad had crocodilians. So, wow. We were weird animal people regardless. And then, my mom did wildlife rehab and stuff like that. So I was around animals that other people weren't, and I wanted to be a veterinarian really bad. And I took all of the pre-college courses to gain college credits in high school. But I am dyslexic, and if anyone's seen me type online, y'all will know that by just like reading anything I've ever said. So that was, even though every single animal management, like intro to vet tech, all that, I graduated top of my class of all of that. I got awards literally. So I was very good at that part, but I was not good at all the other very necessary aspects to being a veterinarian. So I thought I will pick my backup, which I have a really big passion for, essentially like making people feel pretty, hair, makeup, all that kind of stuff, skin health. I went down that path and I was good at it, again, top of my class, but I hated it so much. I hated the job. I hated the environment. I did not feel like I had purpose, even though it's a very purposeful job. It did not feel like I was doing what I wanted to do. And so I kind of beelined and ran from that. And around that same time, when I was trying to decide what am I going to do, I met Jackson. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never got to really explore the world of reptiles to the level that I've wanted to. I've worked with crocodilians and turtles and tortoises. That was like the extent of my reptile stuff. I never really messed with snakes at all, or really any smaller lizards of any kind. And so he worked at this amazing facility, and I got really passionate about that. And then eventually we actually started dating, and maybe like pretty shortly after, he was like, can she come learn here? Can she come see the animals and blah, blah. And because the person who runs this facility, he's very secretive and particular. He was like, oh, this is an amazing opportunity for me to get another employee that I can trust fully. I don't have to worry about anything like that because she comes along with him, essentially. And so I started that, and I got mentored for quite a while. And then I started getting paid to work there. And at that point, he had taken on a pretty heavy workload of like 60, 70, 80 hours a week. So I started working there.
At a different place.
Yeah, at a different place, yeah. At his normal, regular job. I started working there even more. It was like 3 days a week for quite a while. And at that time, we started founding our own facility. We kind of wanted to go into education. The man who mentored us, the veterinarian, I'm not going to say his name just because he's very secretive. But the man who mentored us, he said, we're the last people he wants to teach. He's, 70 plus at this point. He doesn't want to do this again. And he was like, I want to work out a deal with you guys where you work for me, but eventually you're going to take over some of my animals. And whenever I get out of it, eventually, they'll come to you. And we built up our facility during that time. And we opened to the public for a while with just reptiles, and it was phenomenal. And we decided we wanted to combine all of our resources and properties in one location. So like everything is much easier to manage. And when we did that, we needed a whole new slew of licensing for all of the like primates and mammals and stuff. And so we closed and did a massive renovation of like 10,000 square feet of buildings.
Wow.
We're in our 20s. We don't come from money or anything like that, and we don't want to take out loans. So we are quite literally building this off of like thin air.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's been slow going, but we're on the cusp of opening.
Yeah, and that's basically how we both got here.
So do you live on the property?
No, right now we live off of the property as we're building it, because we are currently still battling to get plumbing installed. It is a huge, ridiculous thing.
Talked about earlier.
Yes, yeah.
But we're hoping to buy the land that we currently own is connected to another property, and we bought this land from these people. They are going to start retiring. We want to buy all the rest of it, and that area has a spot where we can build our house.
Gotcha.
And that's our goal, is to live on it. But the land in our area is incredibly expensive because it's dual zone commercial. So we're talking about land that's like 100,000 plus an acre.
Oh my gosh! Wow, that's crazy.
And that's undeveloped. So
yeah.
That is our goal next, to buy off at least half of that and put a house there. And we've already started, like we've started buying materials for our house. We're going to build our own. But yeah.
So are you two? Do you have a day job, or I mean, if you don't have to answer this, is like a personal thing. Like how?
Day job. He has another job, and he also works at the facility. And then we have 2 employees, and we do have some volunteers.
Okay, so sorry, I think I cut you off when you say you do have a day job, Zoe?
This is my day job.
Oh, this is your day job. Okay, so are you open to now? Is it open to the public? I'm just trying to figure out cash flow wise. You're not open again yet.
We do off-site educational events and birthday parties.
Okay, gotcha.
Living on site right now.
Gotcha. Okay, and then as far as you mentioned the plumbing issues, or trying to get permits for that. Once that's done, is that then the next step to reopen to the public? I
We would
guess.
build public bathrooms. We would start the build of our house, and we would open as soon as we get all of our permitting done. Because once you get the bathrooms, and then we're allowed to install water after the bathrooms are installed. Then we're allowed to install all the extra electrical poles, because we use a lot more electricity than the average place.
Sure.
I think we're going to have like 5 electric poles just on the backside. And then we can also install parking spots and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, the septic required for the property halted everything else. Once we applied for it, they said you cannot put anything else on here until you get approved. And so all these amazing things like our gate and our fencing and everything else that we'd already purchased, we were told we cannot do until we get this permit. Mm-hmm. And it turned from a 3-week permit into 9 months.
Dang. Well, you're on the right track at least. It just might take some time to kind of sort it all out.
So we're hoping maybe 6 months after the permit that we can do a soft opening where we're going to have at least the minimum the reptile house open and the outdoor reptile sections. And then we can go and get our next level of ZAA accreditation done and USDA inspections done. And then all the mammals will be opened up as well.
Can you list off some of the species that you keep, and maybe both reptile and mammal? Because I know you have kind of a decent spectrum.
So we work with 80 different venomous species, and some of them we have dozens of one, and some of them we just have one of one. But that's a pretty large group of venomous.
Are those in zoo exhibit type things, or are some of them in kind of smaller? You're keeping a large volume.
We don't keep anything in a rack system or tub at all. We have quarantine housing that's in more of a sterile setup, but everything else is kept naturalistic. That's just what we personally believe in. We always told ourselves that despite having this large quantity of animals, we will never sacrifice quality. And if that ever became a thing, then we would no longer get more. But if you go on any of my social medias, I think you can see that everything that's posted is way, way above minimum requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
And like I said, please feel free to check. You can tell people afterwards in the video your thoughts. But we also keep lemurs, and we keep pilates, and we keep porcupines. We just had baby porcupines. We have rainforest possums. We have fish. We have leeches and aquatics. We have a lot of birds. We have basically every little random category we have stuff in. Do you have any specifics to list off?
No, I mean that covered most of it.
Yeah.
Most of the some of the.
We have a lot of rodents.
Kangaroo rats.
He's reptiles were his thing in when he was younger, and my thing was rodents. So our goal, we want to have one of the most extensive venomous collections in the States by the time we're done, which is very close to being a legit thing already. But we'd also like to have the most extensive species list of rodents.
That's cool. So I think there will be it seems like the people who created the Tiger King and the Chimp Crazy thing are working on a documentary that's sort of reptile related, but also I think zoo animal acquisition related. And so I'm curious, where do the animals come from? And I assume this, I'm just kind of speculating, but I assume what this documentary eventually will show whenever it comes out is that there's a lot of shady stuff that happens for zoos acquiring animals, whether they're accredited zoos or just, whatever roadside zoos. Where do you guys get your animals? Is there a legitimate way to get them, or is there some things that you kind of have to, you don't have to expose yourself if there's some gray area, but I'm just curious do you have any exposure to the kind of the shadier side of what the potential is for acquiring animals?
So we are aware of people that we would never interact with, and we would avoid the plague. They are, no matter what that film portrays, they are the vast minority. To get the kind of licensing that you need to run even a roadside zoo, it is so incredibly intense. Every single thing is documented, and there's trails. There's obviously stuff that falls through the cracks, and these requirements have gotten stricter over time. But we do not choose to participate in anything that is even remotely gray area. And if we think it's gray area, we are messaging our inspector, we are messaging the county, we are messaging whoever we think we need to. And if we can't get a clear answer, we're just not going to do it.
A lot of our animals also surrendered, actually.
Yeah.
Like, not necessarily from a bad
Most
home
of
or
our
anything.
large mammals were surrenders. And when I say surrenders, I use that word carefully because they're not what I would call a rescue. They're from like private keepers who, their entire place got destroyed by a hurricane, and they cannot, like, they had the money and the resources to care for this animal, and then disaster struck. Or there's we've had plenty surrendered, gifted, whatever you want to call it, from other facilities and zoos. We've had lots of we make really good friends and connections with all these places. A lot of the animals for mammals have just come to us. And then as far as like snakes, because we came, our start was from a facility that was, we were joking at the Venom conference that the facility that we worked at and the one that we have now rivals a lot of Venom labs,
Right.
So we didn't really need to search far for these animals. They were being produced at the facility that we worked at.
Yes,
And,
yeah, that makes sense.
We don't typically import anything from Europe or anything like that. We stick to people that are already captive breeding in the States. It feels safer as far as like exposure to illnesses and stuff anyway.
Sure.
And then we always, we just keep paper trails of everything that we do.
Yeah.
We're not into big cats or giant primates or any of the like buzzword animals. So we don't have to worry about the nuances with those types.
Like, for instance, like she was saying, Ryson, our black mamba that we own personally at the facility, he was hatched out at our work.
Mm-hmm. And then his parents were hatched out there. Like the place that we got to mentor at, he has generations of animals, which is really cool. So like you can see the babies and the grandparents in the same room.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, and that is great to hear. I mean, I think, I don't know, again, I'm kind of speculating with this documentary or whatever it's end up going to be, but I feel like it's going to do damage to people who are doing things well, because they're going to find like the 0.5% of people that do the sketchy things and acquire animals off of like the dark web or something, and then it just is going to paint a picture of everybody doing it that way. And like you said, even if you are, a uncertified quote roadside zoo, which is in some ways a bit of a pejorative, but there are probably some great facilities out there that would kind of fall into that category. They still have to go through the proper paperwork and proper acquisition. It's not just go in a back alley and buy a tiger. That does happen, but that's not the norm.
Both Tiger King and Chimp Crazy, soon after the Big Cat Safety Act and the Captive Primate Safety Act followed.
Right.
And
yeah.
that hurt a lot of responsible private keepers.
Exactly.
What's amazing is if you look into the Primate Safety Act, it hasn't passed yet, but it's gaining traction. It's going to increase a ton of requirements on actual education facilities, but it will not stop like Billy Joe from down the road from going to buy a lemur, putting it in a diaper and keeping it in his apartment. There is no restriction in that stops him from doing that, but it might make it exponentially harder for a facility that's never broken a single rule. And I don't understand, like, the government tends to make rules that they don't understand geared with good intentions, and they don't like follow through with that, if that makes any sense, I mean,
anybody that's dealt with bureaucracy knows that makes perfect sense. I mean, you're dealing with people who are making rules that are not boots on the ground. It doesn't matter what sector you work in. Like, totally unrelated, my career as a swim coach, and we have bureaucrats in that world too that tell you how to coach, but they've never coached. It's like, what are you talking about? You actually have no clue what you're saying. You're just making rules that you think look good, and that's kind of ubiquitous across bureaucracy in general.
I think most people, like most good people in our community, would not be opposed to general safety rules and general safety regulations. It's just a problem historically is the strictest states out there. Like, let's say you take Florida for an example. They're one of the strictest, not the strictest, but one of them. If you look at some of the people who are teaching in Florida, they are some of the people that laws were made for, yet they are allowed to teach and certify people. So there was nothing that stopped the like idiot in the room from being certified and teaching other people their same problems that caused these laws in the first place.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Well, you both are both incredible. You have it's amazing how much you've done in this time. Like you said, you're both very young. You have already a ton of experience, and you've clearly made a massive positive change in the community, which is a challenge to do. I mean, people talk about doing those sort of things, but to actually have a tangible positive effect. I mean, you hear old school venomous keepers just talking about your group, talking about the anti-venom support group, and to me, when I first heard it, I thought it was more. I actually had heard of it before I had reached out to you, Zoe, just through one of the the whole snake bite thing that happened a month or two ago. It just popped up, and I had no idea what it was. I thought it was something that had been around for a long time. So to hear that it just you guys spearheaded that. Yeah, it's amazing, and I can't wait for more for your facility to develop and for that to be open. I don't think we've mentioned the name of it. Can you guys mention what it's called and where people can find it?
The Learning Center, so like the Animal Learning Center.
Fauna Learning Center.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fauna Learning Center. Okay. Is there? But before we wrap up, is there anything else you two wanted to, or either of you wanted to mention before we close out? It's okay if you don't.
Yeah. No. Unless you have any other.
Yeah, I think we covered everything we wanted to hit today. So thank you both for.
If anyone is interested in learning more about essentially all these topics, National Snakebite Support and Venomous Reptile Keeper Mentorship. Those are the two groups that I recommend people joining.
And of course, the anti-venom support group.
And anti-venom support group if they're interested in actually getting anti-venom.
And they should also follow the Sleesvia Snakebite Foundation.
Yes, because the doctors are doing amazing work.
Yeah, that's perfect. And maybe I'll get Zoe. You could send me a bunch of links. I'll make sure that's all in the show notes for people so they can just go click down there. Thank you both for doing this, and not only just the podcast, but for everything that you're doing. I think this is it's rare when you find someone that's made a huge positive effect, and you both have done that. So thank you so much. And what about social media? I know, Jackson, you said you're kind of off social media, so that's great for you. I'm jealous. Zoe, you are on social media. Do you want to let people know where they can find that as well?
I have TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. My Facebook is in professional mode, so anyone can follow me, and 90% of my posts are public.
And say what your Facebook is.
My Facebook is Zoe Renee. Let me see. I don't even know my TikTok name. Let me look.
Yeah, check out that TikTok name. And again, we'll make sure that's all in the show notes.
Okay, Zoe Renee's Zoo is my TikTok. And then Instagram is Zoe_Renee's_Zoo.
Okay.
So basically it's all variations of the same thing.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll make sure that's all in the notes. And for, like you had already mentioned, if anybody is interested in the anti-venom specific stuff, go to the support group, start there, and that's where you're going to get all the information.
Yeah, and they can message us on our public or private profiles, and we will respond and we will help. Awesome. Well, thank you both for spending the hour and a half here with me this morning or this afternoon. This was a fantastic conversation. I know it's going to be a huge resource for people, so thank you very much.
Yeah, it was great.
No, thank you so much for inviting us.
Wow, that was an incredible episode. Zoe and Jackson, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I think the amount of work that you guys have put together to make sure the venomous community is supported is incredible. It's actually inspiring, especially because, there's clearly a positive impact you're having. So listeners, if you are somebody who actually wants to get into keeping venomous snakes at some point, you need to go and investigate what they're up to further. Go to the anti-venom support group. Make sure you're understanding what the protocols you need to follow through to make sure you're doing this properly. But again, also, if you're somebody that just lives in an area with a lot of venomous snakes and you have that, maybe a family member or you yourself are just afraid of encountering a wild snake, I don't see why it wouldn't be a good idea to maybe have that bite protocol around. Maybe you live in an area with lots of rattlesnakes and that can give you kind of a sense of ease. And hopefully we gave you some tools today to help you understand what to do if you do encounter a venomous snake. Like I said through the episode, there's this very bizarre thing about venomous snakes that there are animals out there that can cause death or damage by just a little bit of essentially modified saliva, and it's a fascinating and terrifying thing at the same time. So anyway, Zoe, Jackson, thank you so much for being on the show. Listeners, thank you for listening. Please share this episode far and wide. I think it's one of those episodes that we need to get on the ears of as many people as possible because of how valuable it is. If you would like to support the show more, you can head to Animals at Home. If you'd like to support the show more, you can head to patreon.com/animalsathome. There you have early access to the episodes, the options to submit questions to upcoming guests. But really, it is just a support for the show. You help me make sure the show gets edited, pay for equipment, etc., etc. Also, feel free to rate the show on Spotify or Apple. That does really help as well. If you are looking for more information on the Animals at Home podcast, head to animalsathomenetwork.com. You'll find the show notes for every episode that's been released, including the other shows that are also on this network, which you may not be aware of. So make sure you head there if you're interested in those. They're fantastic shows as well. And I'll catch you guys in the next episode.